Deep in the wilderness, far from cell service and streetlights, something stirs among the trees. For decades, hikers, campers, and weekend travelers have told the same story. Doors slamming on their own, voices echoing from nowhere, shapes moving just beyond the glow of the lantern. When authorities arrive, they find claw marks on the walls, overturned chairs, and sometimes nothing at all. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, just silence and a lingering sense that the woods are watching. These are not ghost stories. These are documented events, hidden in police files, local news clippings, and whispered testimony. Tonight, we venture into that silence to uncover what really happens inside those remote cabins in the woods, where fear takes form and the forest remembers everything. Deep within the forgotten wilderness of the world, where the forest floor swallows sound and the canopy hides the stars, countless wooden cabins stand in silence, relics of another time, scattered among the trees like memories of those who built them. These structures were once places of refuge, built for solitude, for rest, for peace. Yet over the years, they have become something else entirely. Stories whisper through ranger stations, online forums, and small-town bars. Strange lights moving between the trees, screams heard miles from any trail, doors slamming when there is no wind, and people vanishing without a trace. Authorities write them off as accidents, animal attacks, or simple disappearances. But the pattern tells another story, a darker, older story that stretches across continents. In these woods, people don't just get lost. Something finds them. One of the earliest documented cases dates back to October 14, 1992, when a man named Elliot Kane made a chilling distress call from a rented cabin deep in Pine Ridge Forest. His last words, captured in the police dispatch log, were trembling with fear. "It's not an animal, it's here." When officers arrived the next morning, they found the cabin locked from the inside, the fire still burning, and every mirror turned to face the wall. Elliot was gone, not a single footprint, no struggle, no blood, just silence. Investigators searched the surrounding woods for days, but the only sound that echoed back was the creak of branches and the whisper of the wind. Local folklore claimed that the forest was haunted by the Watcher in the Pines, an entity that mimicked human voices to lure travelers away from safety. Scientists dismissed it as mass hysteria or the effect of infrasound, low-frequency vibrations that can cause panic and hallucinations. But none could explain the physical evidence that kept surfacing. Claw marks too deep for any animal, cabin sealed from the inside, and missing persons who seemed to vanish into thin air. Over time, more cases began to surface. A group of college students in 2003 filmed their weekend at an abandoned ranger cabin in the Catskills. The footage showed laughter, a campfire, and drinks, until midnight, when one of them whispered, "Who's walking around out there?" The camera captured a tall, faceless silhouette standing just beyond the firelight. The video cut to black. The cabin burned to the ground 2 weeks later, and no one ever claimed responsibility. Police called it a prank. Locals called it a warning. But perhaps the most disturbing reports come not from tourists or thrill seekers, but from those trained to remain calm. Rangers, investigators, search teams. In 2007, Ranger Jill Morgan responded to an emergency beacon from a cabin deep in Mount Shaw Forest. She found it empty, yet her body camera recorded a faint knocking sound, 3 slow, deliberate taps, continuing even after she stepped outside. Later analysis revealed it matched Morse code for a single word, "Stay." The footage was never released to the public, but a short audio clip leaked online, spreading like wildfire across paranormal forums. Jill refused to speak about it again, and within months, she transferred out of the apartment entirely. Psychologists refer to something called the isolation threshold, the point at which prolonged solitude blurs a line between perception and imagination. But in these woods, the phenomenon goes further. Survivors who make it out, few as they are, describe strange time lapses, watches freezing and hours unaccounted for. Some claim to have heard their own voices calling from outside. Others say they felt watched, not by a person, but by the forest itself. From Oregon's fog-shrouded valleys to the birch forests of Finland, the pattern remains hauntingly consistent. People seek solitude. They enter a remote cabin. They experience something that defies reason, then they disappear. Sometimes, fragments remain. A broken radio, a half-written note, a camera still recording hours of darkness. And always, in every account, there's that same sound slow, measured footsteps across the wooden floor. Experts argue over explanations: environmental stress, hypoxia, wildlife, even carbon monoxide leaks. Yet those who've been close to the evidence, the rangers, the rescuers, the families, know that something deeper lingers in those forests. Something that moves with intent. Something that knows fear as well as we do. For every case that reaches the headlines, there are 10 more buried in small-town archives and unreported police files. The deeper investigators dig, the stranger the coincidences become. Coordinates that appear and vanish from maps, distress signals that originate from locations where no cabin exists, and names that reappear across decades, attached to new victims. So what really happens in these remote cabins when the night closes in? Are these stories the echoes of our own fears, the mind breaking under silence, or proof that the wilderness hides something ancient, something beyond understanding? Every culture has its legends, but these accounts carry evidence. Recordings, photographs, and witnesses who swear they saw eyes glowing just beyond the tree line. As the firelight fades and darkness takes over, even the most rational mind begins to sense it, that creeping realization that we are not alone. The woods have always been a place of mystery, a threshold between the civilized and the untamed. But in these stories, that threshold becomes a trap. Something waits there, watching, listening, learning. And when it decides to move, the walls of the cabin offer no safety at all. They say nature is indifferent. But what if it isn't? What if the forest remembers every scream, every frightened breath, every soul that wandered too deep? What if it listens and answers? As we begin our investigation into these terrifying events, one truth becomes unavoidable. In the endless silence of the woods, when even the wind seems to hold its breath, you don't find the fear. The fear finds you. In the winter of 1978, a chilling case unfolded in the isolated region of Green Hollow, Maine, a vast expanse of pine forest known for its beauty by day and oppressive silence by night. What began as a simple family retreat became one of the most disturbing and well-documented wilderness disappearances in American history. The Henderson family, Michael, his wife Carol, and their 2 young children, Ryan and Lily, had rented a small hunting cabin deep within the woods for the holidays. The cabin had no phone line, no electricity, and could only be reached by a narrow, unpaved road that disappeared beneath snowdrifts every winter. Locals often avoided that part of the forest, claiming that the trees listened there. On December 21st, Michael radioed his brother to say they had arrived safely. That was the last anyone heard from them. 3 days later, a snowstorm swept through the region, cutting off all access. When rescue teams finally reached the cabin a week later, they found a front door hanging open, a fire still smoldering the hearth, and dinner plates set neatly on the table. There were no signs of struggle. The beds were made. The family's winter clothes were still folded on a chair by the window, and yet the Hendersons were gone. Investigators combed the area for weeks. Dogs picked up no scent beyond the front porch. There were no footprints leading away, only faint impressions in the snow that stopped abruptly a few meters from the cabin, as if the family had simply vanished mid-step. Inside, officers found something stranger. The clock on the wall had stopped at exactly 2:43 a.m., and every mirror in the cabin had been covered with bed sheets. On the back of one of the sheets was a smeared handprint, too large to belong to either adult, too human to be animal. The police report, later declassified, mentioned that the cabin's interior temperature was several degrees warmer than expected despite the fire having burned low for days. One officer, who later requested anonymity, described hearing a hollow tapping sound on the walls while documenting the scene. 3 knocks, spaced evenly apart. When he stepped outside, the sound stopped. When he re-entered, it began again from a different wall. His notes ended with a single line. The woods were quiet but not empty. As the case gained local attention, journalists descended on Green Hollow. Theories spread rapidly. Murder-suicide, animal attack, hypothermia-induced confusion, but nothing fit the evidence. No blood, no tracks, no bodies. The Hendersons' car remained parked outside, keys still in ignition. The only item missing from the cabin was Michael's old Super 8 camera. Months later, during the spring thaw, that camera was discovered half buried near a creek 3 miles away. The film inside was water damaged, but partially recoverable. The footage, restored by forensic experts, began with ordinary family moments. children laughing, snow falling, the crackle of a fire. Then, at the end of the reel, the tone shifted. The camera trembled as if in panic. A flashlight beam darted across wooden walls, and a voice whispered, "Do you see it?" Another voice replied, "Don't look at it." Then static. The last frame showed the cabin door slightly open and a shadow stretching across the floor, tall, thin, motionless. Authorities never released the film to the public, claiming it lacked clarity. But leaked transcripts in the restoration lab revealed that technicians who viewed the footage experienced recurring nightmares for weeks afterward, describing a faceless figure that watched from behind glass. Locals of Green Hollow revived old legends following the incident. They spoke of the Tall One, a forest entity said to appear during winter solstice, moving silently between trees, feeding on the fear of the lost. Folklorists trace the myth back to the early 1800s, when trappers disappeared in the same region, their camps left intact but empty. Skeptics pointed out that Green Hollow's geography, a dense basin surrounded by echoing cliffs, could distort sound and trigger disorientation, especially during snowstorms. Yet scientists who visited the area recorded unexplainable anomalies. Magnetic fluctuations, sudden temperature drops, and a persistent humming below human hearing range. One investigator's compass spun violently near the Henderson cabin foundation, even though no metal deposits were nearby. Another described a pressure in the air, as if the forest itself were alive and watching. Theories range from underground seismic activity to infrasound effects, but none accounted for the missing family or the handprint. By the early 1980s, the Green Hollow case had become legend, inspiring books, films, and countless campfire retellings. But buried in government archives, unseen by the public, were follow-up reports that hinted at something more sinister. In 1983, a pair of hikers claimed to have found the remains of a cabin deep within the same woods, burned, blackened, and unfamiliar. When authorities attempted to locate it, there was nothing there. The hikers later recanted their story, saying they must have gone the wrong way. Though one of them told a local journalist he still dreams of a cabin door slowly opening in the dark. The forest, over time, swallowed all traces of the Hendersons and their home. Yet every few years, campers report hearing children's laughter echoing faintly through the trees around December, long after midnight, long after the last snowstorm. Psychologists studying the case have suggested that Green Hollow is a magnet for what they call collective fear imprinting, the idea that trauma leaves an emotional residue, like static energy replaying itself through generations. But even they admit some details remain inexplicable. Radio frequencies malfunction in the area. Compasses spin. Audio equipment records faint breathing when no one is nearby. A 2009 expedition from a Boston University attempted to recreate the conditions of the original incident using sensors and surveillance gear. Their lead researcher, Dr. Lillian Gray, documented several nights of unusual interference and visual distortions. On the final night, she noted in her journal, "We heard tapping again. Always 3 knocks. Always from behind us." The next morning, her team packed up and left without finishing the study. When questioned, Dr. Gray refused to discuss what happened, saying only, "You feel watched, and when you turn around, it's already closer." The Green Hollow incident remains unsolved to this day. No bodies were ever found, no definitive cause determined. Officially, it is classified as an environmental disappearance, but among paranormal researchers, it is something else entirely. A convergence point where science ends and something older begins. Every investigator who visits that forest reports the same feeling. Time slows, sounds warp, and the trees seem to lean closer. Whether it's the echo of fear, a trick of the mind, or the presence of something that should not exist, one truth endures. The woods remember. They remember what they've taken, and they wait for the next visitor to listen closely enough to hear them breathe. After the Green Hollow incident, reports of eerily similar cases began to surface from every corner of the world, each echoing the same chilling hallmarks: a remote cabin, unexplained vanishings, and that recurring detail that investigators could never fully explain. The sound of knocking, always in sets 3. From the fog-drenched forests of Finland, where a group of snowshoers vanished from a lakeside hut in 1985, to the Ural Mountains of Russia, where an abandoned research cabin was found with claw marks gouged into steel siding, the pattern repeated with unnerving precision. Authorities dismissed each case as isolated tragedy, but independent researchers began to draw lines between them. The similarities were impossible to ignore. All the cabins were located in areas of low electromagnetic stability, near bodies of water or deep forest valleys, and nearly every event occurred during the coldest months, between midnight and 3 a.m. In Finland, a local ranger named Eero Vanska documented a case where a family of 4 disappeared overnight from their winter lodge. The next morning, their neighbors found the fireplace still burning and a kettle whistling on the stove. But the strangest discovery was outside, a line of footprints in the snow that led halfway to the tree line, then stopped abruptly. The snow beyond was untouched. When investigators followed the path, their radio transmitters began to malfunction, cutting out with bursts of static. One of them swore he heard children laughing faintly in the woods, though there were no other settlements for miles. The event was quietly archived by Finnish authorities and later declassified in 2004 under the title Incident 43B. The official explanation cited environmental disorientation, but the report's final line, written by hand, read simply, "We were not alone." The same winter, halfway across the globe, an identical disappearance occurred in British Columbia, Canada. A team of wildlife photographers set out to document migrating elk and stayed in a Forest Service cabin along the Skeena River. They were experienced woodsmen, all veterans of the region. But after a week of radio silence, a search party discovered the cabin empty. Cameras, gear, and food remained untouched. The door was bolted from the inside. On the wall above the fireplace, someone had carved a series of concentric circles, identical to markings found at Green Hollow decades earlier. Forensic analysis determined they were etched with something metallic, possibly the edge of a camera tripod. No fingerprints, no DNA, no trace of photographers was ever found. Yet one of the undeveloped film rolls contained a single image that defied logic, a dark clearing illuminated by a flash, revealing what appeared to be a figure standing several feet behind the photographer, towering, faceless, its edges blurred as though it was vibrating. Experts dismissed it as motion distortion. Others saw it as proof that something or someone had been there. The negatives mysteriously vanished from the evidence archived months later, along with the written analysis. These patterns began to form an unsettling map, dozens of red pins marking points across continents where civilization thins and wilderness takes over. Siberia, Norway, Alaska, the Appalachian Trail, even parts of Patagonia, all home to unexplained disappearances linked to remote structures, all accompanied by inexplicable phenomena, sudden static interference, frozen clocks, covered mirrors, and that haunting sense of being watched. Anthropologists began to notice that local legends in each area described a nearly identical entity, a tall, faceless watcher that dwelled at the edge of human habitation. Some called it the Listener, others the Echo Man, the Hollow One, or simply it. The oldest known reference appeared in an 1823 journal from a Russian trapper who wrote of hearing knocks on his cabin door each night, always 3 times, but finding no one outside. After the 7th night, his journal ended abruptly. The last line read, "I've covered the mirror." Decades later, during a dig in northern Scandinavia, archaeologists unearthed wooden panels from an 11th century structure bearing the same carved symbols, 3 circles bound by lines, accompanied by runic inscriptions that roughly translated to "returns in the snow." Skeptics tried to explain these parallels through psychology, suggesting that isolation triggers similar patterns of paranoia across cultures, hallucinations shaped by fear and loneliness. But that theory faltered when confronted with physical evidence. Identical carvings found continents apart, magnetic interference measurable by modern equipment, and witness testimonies separated by generations yet eerily consistent in detail. In 1998, a private research team known as Project Argus compiled over 200 cases spanning 70 years, correlating missing persons data with environmental conditions and lunar cycles. Their conclusion was unsettling. A spike in incidents occurred precisely during new moons in December and January in regions with minimal light pollution. The lead investigator, Dr. Anton Wirth, claimed in a leaked audio interview that something responds to silence. Weeks later, he vanished during a solo expedition to a cabin in Austria's Black Forest. The only item recovered was his voice recorder, found lying in the snow several miles from his vehicle. The tape inside contained 37 seconds of sound, wind, static, and then 3 slow knocks, followed by his voice whispering, "It's inside." Even modern technology offers little protection. In 2016, hikers in northern Japan uploaded footage showing a cabin light flickering on and off through dense mist. When local authorities investigated, they found no electrical wiring, no generator, and no source of light. The structure was abandoned, yet the snow surrounding it had melted in a perfect circle, as though something radiated heat from within. The incident reignited global interest, prompting documentaries, podcasts, and scientific studies. Yet, for every explanation, gas leaks, optical illusions, carbon monoxide hallucinations, another inconsistency emerged. The cabins were too far apart, the details too synchronized, the witnesses too varied. It was as if some force, ancient and intelligent, used isolation itself as a doorway, manifesting only when humans were truly alone, when their fear reached a certain threshold. Across time and geography, the stories remain the same. People retreat into the wilderness to find peace, only to discover something already waiting for them. Whether psychological, environmental, or otherworldly, the pattern defies coincidence. Something binds these events, something that thrives where silence falls deepest and civilization feels farthest away. Investigators now refer to the phenomenon simply as a cabin effect, though none can agree on its nature. Some claim it is a natural resonance, an echo between magnetic fields and human consciousness. Others believe it is older than humanity, a sentient presence that lingers in forgotten places, feeding on fear, drawing the lost into its grasp. Whatever it is, one truth remains constant. Once it finds you, it does not forget. From the frozen forests of Finland to the black pines of Maine, from the mountains of Japan to the valleys of Patagonia, the same story repeats. A door half open, a fire still burning, and the silence of the woods pressing against the walls, waiting for someone to listen to the knocking that comes, always 3 times, from somewhere just beyond the dark. For decades, investigators, researchers, and those obsessed with the unknown have tried to understand the pattern behind these frightening events. But as the reports grew, so did the silence of the agencies that once studied them. In 2019, an anonymous whistleblower leaked a series of internal documents from an unlisted government project called Operation Hollow Eye, claiming it was created in the late 1960s to track recurring anomalies in wilderness zones. The files described spatial disturbances centered around isolated human dwellings, specifically cabins built near fault lines or magnetic intersections. The document spoke of auditory manifestations preceding event threshold, 3 knocks, always rhythmic, always precise, and spatial inversion events where recorded time did not align with physical evidence. One report mentioned a cabin in northern Colorado that appeared on aerial photographs for 3 years, then vanished without trace. Another included thermal scans showing a heat signature in an unoccupied structure shaped like a human figure. The document ended abruptly in 1989, with a handwritten note scrawled across the last page. Containment is impossible. They follow sound. Following the leak, several of the researchers named in the documents refused interviews. One, speaking under anonymity, claimed that their studies concluded these phenomena were not supernatural, but interactive, a reflection of fear itself, responding to consciousness like a mirror. If true, it meant that whatever haunted those cabins wasn't a creature at all, but an echo, a manifestation of human terror that learned to take form. In the years since, the phenomenon has grown bolder. Modern surveillance footage, captured by remote motion sensors, reveals distortions, shapes bending light, shadows that move against the wind. In 2021, a live streamer in Oregon vanished during a broadcast from a forest cabin he had rented for a 24-hour challenge. The final seconds of his stream showed him turning toward the door as 3 knocks echoed through the microphone. His camera toppled over, the image blurred, and the stream cut to black. No trace of him was ever found. His followers believed it was a hoax until investigators confirmed his disappearance. A week later, viewers noticed something strange in the archive footage. A faint reflection in the cabin's window, tall, pale, motionless, standing behind him moments before the knock. For skeptics, it was another case of staged viral horror. For others, it was proof that the presence had adapted, moving from forgotten woods into the wired age, watching through lenses and glass. The pattern hadn't stopped. It had evolved. Reports continued to emerge from Scandinavia, South America, and even remote parts of Australia, each echoing the same narrative. The knocking, the static, the silence that follows. Whether ancient force or psychological contagion, one truth united them all. Wherever humanity builds walls against the unknown, something eventually knocks to be let in. But beneath the headlines and conspiracy videos, a smaller detail has begun to surface. Survivors. A handful of individuals, scattered across decades, claim to have lived through the phenomenon. Their testimonies, though fragmented and traumatized, reveal chilling similarities. Each describes a sense of presence inside the cabin, an overwhelming feeling of being studied. One man from Wyoming claimed he saw his reflection moving slightly out of sync before the mirror cracked. A woman in Siberia said she heard her daughter calling from outside the cabin, though her daughter had died years before. When she opened the door, the voice was behind her. Psychiatrists diagnose these cases as hallucinations induced by isolation and fear. Yet the physical evidence, cracked mirrors, warped electronics, scorched walls, refuses to fit that explanation. Survivors report strange phenomena long after leaving the woods. Electronic devices turning on by themselves, distorted sounds and recordings, and dreams of cabins they've never seen. Some never return to nature again. Others disappear years later, leaving behind messages that suggest the phenomenon followed them home. As the camera pulls back from the forest, one realization settles like mist. Perhaps the cabins themselves are not the source, but the stage. Isolation, silence, reflection, the perfect conditions for something ancient to take shape. Cultures across the world have warned for centuries about places where the veil is thin. Maybe the cabins, built on those thresholds, invite whatever waits beyond. When we enter them alone, bringing our fears, our memories, our need to escape, something answers that invitation. Maybe it doesn't come from the forest at all. Maybe it comes from us. The knocking, the presence, the mirrored reflection, all symptoms of an intelligence drawn to fear like light to a flame. And once you've felt it, once you've heard it, you become part of its story. That's why every account ends the same way. With silence, or a whisper caught on tape, or 3 knocks on it before everything stops. So tonight, as darkness falls and the wind stills outside your window, think about the ones who went into the woods and never came back. Think about the cabins standing empty beneath the trees, their windows black, their doors half open, as if waiting for someone to step inside. And if you ever find yourself in one, alone, surrounded by endless silence, listen carefully before you sleep. If you hear tapping on the wall, if your reflection doesn't quite move the same way, if the forest seems to lean closer to your cabin's walls, don't open the door. Don't answer. Because it might not be the wind. It might be the same presence that took the Hendersons, the hikers, the photographers, the thing that feeds on fear, memory, and sound. And if the knocking comes again, 1, 2, 3, remember the warning written in every forgotten police report and whispered by every survivor who dare to tell their story. Never stay after dark. And so the question remains, what truly happens in those forgotten cabins deep within the woods? Are these events the echo of our own fear, or evidence of something that watches from the dark, waiting for isolation to open the door? The forests still stand, vast and indifferent, but maybe not empty. The wind carries whispers of laughter, of footsteps that stop when you listen, of something that once called your name and never forgot the sound of your voice. Every log in every abandoned cabin tells the same silent story, of those who went inside and never came out, of fires that burn without fuel, and clocks that stop at the same impossible hour. The archives may be sealed, the evidence buried, but the pattern continues. Somewhere right now, someone has gone off the grid, seeking peace, and is hearing the first knock on their wall.